I'm Lynn. I recognize a lot of you from the library where I work, and I've taught this workshop 3 times at the library, as Laura said, for groups of 10 to 16, usually kids. I've done one with grown-ups, and then the garden club got wind of it and asked me to do it, and I was like, holy cow, I've never done one for a group that big. But Laura, thank you to Laura and the garden club, and this was a huge collection of an effort to collect all these supplies. I didn't do most of this, they did, so I appreciate all of that work, putting it all together. So we are going to first go through how to build a terrarium. I'm going to do I'm going to lay out all of the steps first so that you can think through as you're learning about the steps how you want yours to look, because this is a creative process, but there's also a science behind it because we want it to survive. So we're going to get at all of the components that'll create an ecosystem that will live hopefully a long time in your house. All of these ones up here are ones I built for the library, and they're at least a year old. Some of them are a couple years old. Hopefully yours will do the same. So I'm going to walk through the entire process before we start building really quickly, and then we'll come back to it as we go through each step. Just so you have the big picture of what we're going to do today, and then we'll break it down into smaller pieces. So, let's see. This is.
Oh.
Are we doing the Zoom thing?
Yeah, she'll work now, Lynn.
Okay. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is the 2 types of terrariums, and the reason that a lot of terrariums go awry is because there are 2 types that get mixed up all the time. So we today are making the kind on the left, which is a closed terrarium, and they all have lids on them, even though the one in the picture does not have a lid on it. But you also see on the right side is the classic succulent. That terrarium is super open. It's basically just like a pot, right, with succulents in it, and it just happens to be in glass. So these are 2 very different types of plants, as you know, and very different types of terrariums that result in them. So if you have at home or you see at the store a terrarium, a piece of glassware that looks like that, and you want to build a terrarium with a piece of glassware that looks like that, and not put saran wrap over the top, you're dealing with a succulent terrarium, which we're not making today. We're doing the type on the left. We're using a lot of local things. We want to use moss, of course, from outside, and build a closed system that needs a lot more humidity. So these terrariums, as you have, we have clear lids for them, or you can put saran wrap over them. You could use another type of glass if you covered it with saran wrap. It's probably not most people's aesthetic choice, but it would work. We can go to the next slide. The vessel is fairly straightforward. We're going to use clear glass. It doesn't have to be glass. Plastic works too. Anything that is clear and inert. We're using fairly large containers. Some people make terrariums in spice jars or even in little like chemistry vials just for the fun of it. The smaller you get, the more work they are to maintain because the plants grow. So we're using a fairly large-ish size, between a ½ gallon to a gallon, which will give you more room to play with your design. It'll give the plants more room to grow, and you can do more things in a slightly larger terrarium. So the first thing we're going to do once we get started is put in the drainage layer. That's the pea gravel that is in bowls on your table. The drainage layer is so that the roots of the plants aren't sitting in water. We're using pea gravel. You can also use the lightweight expanded clay aggregate, the LECA. We don't have that today. Sometimes when I build a terrarium, I'll put like a little bit of terracotta down in the middle, in the bottom where you can't see it, like broken pots, just to absorb any extra water. We're not going to do that today. It's usually not necessary. You can tell if you get water collecting down here, you've overwatered it, and you just need to take the lid off for a while and let it dry out. The next layer after that will be, oops, we skipped through. Okay. Then everybody has, so I did the, in this one, I did the gravel. You're going to do about an inch of gravel for a gallon size terrarium, maybe a little less if you're dealing with a smaller jar. And then on top of the gravel, we'll go this piece. Everybody should have a piece of screen. So when we get started working on it, there's scissors and there's screen, and you'll cut it to the diameter of your vessel. It's okay if a little bit of it is showing around the sides, but if you don't like the look of it showing, you can trim it to get really precise about it. This is so that the substrate, the soil that we're going to put in next, doesn't just fall down into the gravel layer and then all get mixed up and then you have no more drainage. So this is blocking the substrate from going into the drainage layer. Also, if the soil fills up that, it doesn't look as nice because you don't have a clean division of layers. So that'll be step two. And then we work the soil substrate is the fancy term for it. You guys have this on your tables too, usually in white buckets. So I made this yesterday. This is a mix of cocoa fiber, sphagnum and peat moss, horticultural charcoal, bark, and worm castings. I didn't put the ratio. It's mostly cocoa fiber and peat moss. The horticultural charcoal helps with, it's like antibacterial, it helps fight mold. The worm castings are obviously for food, and the bark also helps with drainage, and it also just replicates the natural environment of a lot of these plants. My kids and I collected the bark from outside. When you get to this step, and I'll say this again when we get there could be larger chunks of bark or rocks even, or maybe even some screws because it came from our wood pile. Feel free to take all that out. Any large chunks, any dead leaves you can take out. We don't want a ton of decomposing material because that will mess up the balance. So you can pick out, I usually don't put perlite in terrarium substrate, but one of the bags that I got did have some of that in there. And if you don't like the look, it won't hurt anything. If you don't like the look of the perlite is the little white stuff that's always in potting soil, these little white nuggets. If you don't like the look of that, you're welcome to take that out too, but it won't hurt anything. So when we do the soil, this is where we get all creative, also with the glass and the sand from the exchange. So these layers that you see on these two are purely aesthetic. They have no scientific or plant purpose at all. They're just for looks. And when we get to that step, the way that we'll do that is, let's just take this for example. You'll take your sand, and we do not want the sand to go through the entire width or diameter of the soil. You don't need it. It's only for looks. So I will show you when we get there, but I'll tilt the glass sideways, pour it in, so it's only on the edge. And if you want the layers like this one over here to be all wavy, you kind of layer in the sand and then the soil and the sand and the soil, and you get to be as artistic about that as you would like. You can use the bigger chunks of glass from the exchange or the smaller stuff. I try to use as little sand as possible because every little bit of sand you're putting in, you're taking away soil from the plant.
Nicely done.
So, and you can skip that step too if you'd like. It's important to it's easy for this layer to get too tall, too thick, and especially if you're being creative and you want lots of little delicate layers. So if it gets too tall, this one is actually probably a little bit too tall because I got a little carried away. If it gets too tall, then you just have less room for your plants to grow. This is a straight-sided container. If you have a container with rounded sides, like a jar, then you have even less room. This one doesn't. This is just moss right now. But these plants that are in here will grow and they'll hit this curve too. So just keep in mind as you're building to save enough space for your plants. And some of the plants we have are taller and then some are short. If you are into moss and rocks and want to just do one like this, then height won't matter as much. But, and this only is like this because the plants that were in it died and I haven't replaced them yet. I didn't do it on purpose. So usually I get carried away with the layer of this layer here and it gets a little taller than I intended for it to. The other thing to consider when you're doing this layer is elevation. This one is flat, like the like the planes. And then most of them that I make are somewhat tilted, where this probably has flattened out a little bit over time just from sitting around and compacting, but this started out like this. So if you want the back to be taller, again, it's only for looks, but if you want to do that, you build that in as you're doing your layers of sand and soil and this and that. So that's why we're talking through all of this, so that you can think about how you want it to look. And then when we get started, there's no surprises. Like, oh, I didn't save enough room for the plants, or I didn't do all the layers I wanted to. So after that, we go to, this is the one on the left with all the blue glass. Was one I made during one of the kids' workshops. They love all the little gems and colorful marbles and all the little unicorns and dinosaurs and dragons and you name it, it's in all of them. And their terrariums are so alive and so magical, and all of mine look so like serious. So I made even dark, some of them. So I made that one inspired by we don't have the colorful glass, we don't have that blue stuff here today. But if you were making one at home, you can get that kind of stuff at Hobby Lobby or Michael's. Back in the craft section, they have all different colors of glass. They also have, you can get sea glass locally or whatever. You can get marbles from your kids' marble collections, all these things that can also add to the look. And there's little things on your tables too to do some of that. This way.
Okay. Why is that not it?
Okay. Once you have the soil and the sand or the rock all placed how you want it, you can. This is where you can decide what order you want to do things in, but usually I do the hardscaping next. This would be the stones or rocks or the ornaments or the marbles or the whatever's on your table or anything you brought with you, and you can change it as you go, but it helps, I think, to get the hardscaping in first, play with the arrangement, and then move on to putting in the moss. So when you do the moss, all the moss here was collected, of course, locally. We have all kinds of it outside of all different varieties, and you'll find that if you play around with this that you'll end up liking some varieties more than others. If you take this, you're going to start, like I said, it's going to start getting tall really quickly, and this 1.5 inches of moss might feel too tall for your terrarium. So feel free when you get to this step, if you want, to take the scissors on the table, and you can see what I'm doing. I'm just cutting that whole brown layer off, and this will grow just fine. And that's for height. If you want to use the whole thing, you can. I always find that I'm running out of space, or I want it to be more of like a small little, like I want to make it a small little like Japanese pillow, very zen or something like that, so you can carve it and cut it and make it look how you want it to look. And then some of the moss, like this one, which I wrote down the names of these. I forget what this one is. I don't have that page open. This one will grow tall really quickly. Moss that doesn't get enough light will get taller and leggy. No problem. You just cut it back, which we'll come back to that. So when you're doing the moss, when you get it home and it starts to grow, some moss will turn brown quicker because it just isn't humid enough in your jar. You can take that out and replace it. The stuff that gets leggy, that needs more light, you can cut it back. So it's an iterative process where you'll just play around with the moss. It's the easiest thing to replace because we have so much of it here. And then the plants. So I think there's enough plants. The idea was that everybody would start out with 2 plants, and all the plants on the table are humidity-loving tropical house plants that should do fine in a terrarium. We have a whole bunch of Fittonia, which is one of my favorites. The Fittonia is the stuff that has the pink or the red veins. Those do really well. This is the arrowhead plant, the tall one, is in some of the terrariums at the library. And then any kind of fern that will fit in a terrarium will survive just fine. And then that's a Fittonia. Yeah, there's all kinds of different plants, and we can get into more detail later on what the plants are. But all of these should work well. And then, of course, you can experiment at home with I've collected ferns from the forest, just itty bitty little, like ones that haven't unfurled yet, and put them in. And most of the plants will stay fairly compact because they don't have a lot of soil space to grow. Some of them will be more vigorous than others and will not stay as compact as they need to, so you just cut them back. But ferns from the forest can also work, and that, I don't know the name of it, but that sedum that has the yellow flowers that turns red in the fall, and has a little, that I've put in terrariums that usually does okay. Anything you bring in from outside, so we have two different things happening with the plants. We've got moss that's used to our climate here where it gets cold in the winter. So we're bringing them into a house where it's at 65 to 70 degrees. This is way warmer than moss is used to. But a tropical houseplant is totally fine being at a temperature of 70 degrees year-round. So you may find that some of the moss will need to be replaced just because it's too warm and it doesn't get that cold season. The ones at the library tend to do fine. Some mosses work better than others. The houseplants should be fine staying indoors all year round. But you have that, if you take your plants in the winter and you put them in like a cold, unheated room, because that's where you store your houseplants in the summer, the tropical plants will be fine, they'll go more dormant, and the moss will be happier. But there's a lot of ways to do it and make it all work. And then, the microfauna goes in to keep them healthy, and this was one of the tricks that we didn't do when my kids were little and we built terrariums and they lasted a month and we dumped them in the compost because we didn't know or care what we were doing. These are the housekeepers that will eat the decomposing material, although you can also pick it out, and they will provide nutrients over time. So in the first few months that your terrarium is like living at home, it doesn't care. But if you want it to last years, it'll be healthier if you have springtails in them. So everybody will get springtails. That's, those larger white things are grains of rice. So these are really tiny little bugs. They live outside in a leaf litter. I bought them from a company that sells things for terrariums. They would be if you were making a terrarium that had animals in it, like frogs, or if you were doing reptiles. Springtails are sometimes the food for some of those, so terrarium companies sell them for the little animals that are in those kind of terrariums to eat. We are putting them in here for the plants to eat the mold and to eat the decomposing material. You don't need very many of them, although I have plenty, you can have as many as you want. They will self-regulate. They will, if there's not enough food in the terrarium for them, they'll die back, and then when there's more food, they'll breed and proliferate. When we start out today, because we're starting with a fresh environment, we're going to dump them in there. There will be decomposing material, but to give them a little bit of a head start, everybody can, if you'd like, put a couple grains of rice in your terrarium. You can restock that at home. And you'll actually see it's getting eaten, which is really cool. But if it's not getting eaten because you put in too much, take it out. When it gets moldy, take it out. Because it will get moldy if it's not getting eaten. Like 1 or 2 grains is all that they really need. And that gives the terrarium a chance to cycle through, like a layer, cycle through and create more decomposing material for them to eat. And if we have different types of jars here. A lot of the jars have just a clear acrylic lid. This will, obviously they'll be fine, but even if you have a sealed jar, fine for them to breathe. But even if you have a jar like this, with a seal on it, and you're going to close it up, and this is not going to need to be watered very much, this is a very closed ecosystem, they still don't need oxygen, because the plants create enough oxygen for them to breathe, which is cool. So it's truly like a closed system if you want it to be. And then the lid. Again, this is like the key that some of the pretty containers you see at the store and might try to make a terrarium with. If they don't have a lid, you're out of luck. And a lot of terrariums come with lids like in the upper left and lower right, like a cork or wooden lid. There's nothing wrong with this from a closed terrarium point of view. Now we're just talking about light. So if you have a solid lid and you have a fairly large terrarium, you're losing a lot of light by having a solid lid. Now, it's better than not having a lid at all, but the best thing to do, if you're shopping for containers at the exchange to make more of these, they're not going to usually come with lids. This is probably like a candelabra thing. But you can buy these acrylic discs, which the Garden Club has supplied for the ones you have today. You can buy these on Amazon in all different diameters, or you can cut your own, which I think you guys did for some of the ones that were square. Thank you. So the purpose of this is being clear, is for light. So again, a lot of the ones you buy have a cork lid. If you can get your terrarium to have enough light and the plants aren't getting leggy, cork is fine. But you also can't put them in direct sun. They need indirect light, like sitting in a north window. And if it's a large jar, like those two are, you're losing a lot of light. The little jar up there on the upper right has a solid lid, but it doesn't really matter because it's so small. It's not losing light from that little tiny 1.5-inch wide lid being solid versus glass or clear. And then, of course, there's some of these that are being demonstrated to be what these two here. The second one there and this dark one don't have lids at all. And you see this all the time on Pinterest or Instagram with terrariums that don't have lids on them. And I'm like, that'll never survive. You have to have that closed off. So it'll dry out. Even if you watered it all the time, it's just going to not have enough humidity for the moss to survive year-round indoors. It won't be because it's so much drier in our houses than it is outside. Okay. Real briefly, I'll talk about care. I'm going to talk about this again when you're done, as we start to finish up. Somewhere in here, I have a terrarium. So if they sit in the sun, you could cook your plants. You will definitely cook your springtails. You will also, no, you can come look at this later if you want. There's like this green sort of algae around this. This is from it getting too much light sitting on my desk at the library. This is the side that was facing the window. And then this nice white side is the side that wasn't facing the window. So this is purely aesthetic. The algae isn't hurting anything, but your lovely little layers of sand and rock and soil will start to look a little bit green, like how our lakes look at the end of the summer. So far, the springtails don't seem to like clean that up for me. I've thought about, I need to put more in there and see, but I don't think it'll help. I could go in there with like a tweezer or a chopstick and just try to scrape it out a little bit. But direct light at a minimum will create more algae in your terrarium. It'll also, springtails won't survive and your plants could cook too. So keep them out of direct light. And then water. Watch, these are the library ones. The people touch them all the time. These lids fall off. Kids put their hands in them, which is totally fine. But they do dry out. I actually have to water these every 2 to 3 months. I didn't think I'd have to water them hardly at all, but I water them a lot more because this is not sealed. This is just sitting on top of here. So the jars you have, if you have a jar that is more sealed, you will not have to water it as much. This is very much like you just have to keep an eye on it and get a feel for what it needs with water. If this starts to dry out and look like a lighter color, the soil, if the brown soil is starting to look lighter brown and not the color it is today, if you notice that the rock layer is looking really dry, or if you see that the leaves are wilting on your plants, just water it, and then we'll put the lid on it and then watch it for the next few days, because you may have overwatered it. If you overwater it, it's fine. You'll have a lot of condensation on the sides and the top, and you just take the lid off, and so you play with it until it's just living its own life, and you don't need to do anything to it. And you're not seeing condensation, but also the plants aren't wilting. It's not that hard to do, but you might have to play with it at first, because I don't know how everybody is going to go home today with a different level of wetness, because these are really wet. The plants are really wet. The moss is wet. So it could be that it'll be a little bit wet when you go home, and it'll get a lot of condensation on it by tomorrow morning, and you'll want to air it out, or maybe not. So just keep an eye on that. And then the pruning. So like this one here, this is a little ficus bonsai. I was waiting until today to show you. It's growing out of its jar. And I don't want that, so I'm just gonna cut it back. And you wanna be a little bit brutal about cutting them back because you don't want the leaves touching the glass. That will, the leaves will get all icky the way wet leaves get. And it it'll help the plant, it'll encourage growth. If you cut it back and keep your plants compact, they'll typically branch out and they'll stay small and lovely. So go ahead and whenever you feel like you need to, cut it back so that you have a more, there we go. I know you can't see that real well, but you're welcome when we start working to come up and look at all of this. So that is now that was driving me crazy that it was overgrowing like that. Ferns will grow a lot too, and this Betonia, which is the one with the veins, the red and pink veins, I think everybody has that on their table. That gets leggy as well. So this one here, I'm gonna cut this all the way back, this plant here, the Betonia. You can cut those back, they will get tall and they can be fairly vigorous, especially the red one. If you have the pink one, it's not quite as vigorous. So just keep doing this whenever you need to and just cut it back and then they'll like branch out and they'll be cute little compact plants. Okay, that's the basic overview. Before we get started, does anybody have any questions? Yeah?
When you water, should you mist it with a mixture?
Yes. Sometimes I just pour water in because I know it's really dry. But if you want to do a little at a time and not overwater, a mister is great. And it can be good for the leaves too, especially the moss. That way the moss is getting wetter on both the leaves and the substrate is getting wet. They will tell you to use rainwater or bottled water so you're not getting the chemicals in your water if you have treated water, which we do in town. But I have watered these for 1.5 years with library water that is treated and they are all fine. So you can do it either way. Okay, we're not done yet. We're just gonna go back to the beginning and do you're welcome to work ahead a little bit, but also if you wanna just do each step together, that's fine. And I'll walk around and answer questions and I can talk more about this, especially when we get to the substrate and the sand and all that. That's a little more complicated. We can talk about that more then if we need to. So, starting with your bottom layer, you put in about 1 inch of pea gravel and then cut your screen to fit the diameter of your jar if it doesn't already. Questions about watering, as I was talking about that. If you want to if it feels dry to you, and everybody here is, of course, plant aficionados, put in a tablespoon or two of water, put the lid on it and see what happens. You're probably going to have condensation on the glass tomorrow, probably. Depending on your house, how warm your house is, where you have it sitting, all those things. If you get hot, and I meant to bring one that was full of condensation, but it's dried out last night. So this one was covered in condensation. It looked like the inside of a window on a winter day. And that needed to be dried out. It's not great for the leaves. It's not great for the it's just too humid in there. So I took the lid off, or it fell off, and it dried out and it's gone. Mine are a little wetter. My layer of substrate is more black than yours. Yours is lighter brown because yours is drier. But after it sits with a lid on it for a while, it will balance out because you have moisture in here. It's just not in the substrate. So just watch and see what happens. You can totally put more water in it. The plants are very hydrated. The plants are what needs the water. The moss is fine. The plants need water. They need to get settled in. They need to root themselves. But they came to you wet and hydrated, and they're not dry or lacking water right now. So you can watch and see what happens. And plan to add a tablespoon or two of water at some point. You can do it today, or you can do it in a week. And then you'll be wiping down condensation if you're getting condensation in there. If you get condensation in there, you can also take the lid off. And if you have water collecting at the bottom and you can see, it won't be much, but if you see water sitting in the bottom in the drainage layer, let it dry out without the lid for a while. I promise after a week or two, you will not have to pay that much attention to it. It takes it a while for it to all, like, the water to get distributed throughout soil that you have, the substrate, and for it to all kind of get get going. What was the other question? Yeah.
Number one, I think the instructions are on the website.
Oh, instructions for how to maintain it?
The whole process. It seemed to me there were materials and instructions.
Yes. Laura, did you put instructions on the Garden Club's website on how to? DJ is asking. Okay.
But I certainly can.
Yeah,
This is the supply list that was with the email.
got it. The this PowerPoint will be on, I think, the Garden Club's website too.
Yeah, I'll link the your presentation on the YouTube recording of your presentation.
That's great. Other questions, where do we get the materials such as the substrate?
Okay. So if you're, let's just say you want to make 10 terrariums with all your grandchildren over Christmas break, and you need a whole bunch more stuff. You can order terrarium substrate online. I think even Lowe's has it on their website, but certainly garden centers do, and Amazon has it. You can order it already mixed. You don't have to mix it yourself. I mixed it myself. I like to do that kind of thing. You can just buy that. You can use potting soil. Worst case scenario, it probably will be fine. It's a little heavy. Doesn't have as much of the coconut in it, so it's a little bit less than ideal, but it should work okay. You can get the glass. So I'll go through everything. So there's the pea gravel layer, there's all different colors of rock you can use in the bottom layer. Some of mine have a lighter colored rock. You can order all these different colors of rock online. And there's also a store across the street from the co-op in Mount Vernon, Skagit Valley Co-op, right across the street is a houseplant store. And they do a ton of terrarium workshops and things. They have all different colors of rock, sizes of rock, and polished rock and unpolished rock. And it's expensive for a group this size, but if you're only making one, you can pick out your color of rock that you want. It's very fun. You can order the soil, you can get the sand. Let me show you some of the other options for sand. I love this stuff here. It's called filler sand, and I got this at either Hobby Lobby or Michael's, and we used to have it in like 2 different colors for some of the library workshops. And this works well for that sand layer if you weren't using the exchange glass. And then there's this rock here is a little bit more coarse, and this is called horticultural sand, and Christensen's has this, but they were out of it this month. They are so unpredictable with what they have in stock. So we didn't get this, but we also wanted to use the exchanges stuff. But this is also very lovely, and you'll see this in the terrariums that are at the library on the front desk. Okay, more supplies. Do you know where to get the moss, the plants, the rocks, and then the what else is there? These are on Amazon if you need these. You can also, and I have this here, if you find a vessel that you love and you don't have this yet or haven't decided how to make this, you can just put saran wrap over the top as a stopgap or leave it that way forever. And I have saran wrap here if anybody needs it, but that will work too. Look at the supply list and see what else can I talk about with supplies. If you're making more of these at home. Yeah, oh, window mesh. Yeah, I ordered a giant roll of window screen and we cut it out. You have even like an old window in your barn that broke, you just use the screen from an old screen door. Carrie is holding up the thing of window mesh. The plants that we are using today, most of them came from Lowe's. I went to 4 or 5 garden centers, including Christensen's, and was almost in a panic attack panicking because they didn't have the plants that I had bought before. And I'm like, oh my gosh, where am I going to find these? Because you never know what a garden center is going to have for houseplants. And then my last stop was Lowe's, and I spent like $180 on plants at Lowe's. They had everything that I wanted, including ones that had terrarium friendly plants. So right now, anyway, it's still changed. Lowe's has a lot of those types of houseplants. Usually Christensen's does too, but when I was shopping that day, they didn't have what I needed. Is there a question up here?
Do you want me to film?
I don't think it matters. I think
Okay,
it's-
and then the springtails, you can order those online, if you need more. Let's see, these are from a website called West Coast Creatures, that you just Google springtails and you'll find them online for sure. And I have a lot more of them. If anybody didn't get them or wants more, or you wanna bring your tram to the library for Dr. Lynn to fix it, I will give you more. Okay. And then, this sheet that the garden club put out has some of the names of some of these plants that we're using today. Any type of fern as well, and ferns are really easy to buy a 4-inch pot of any type of fern and tear them up into many small pieces and cut the leaves off so you make nice little compact ferns. We didn't have a ton of ferns here today because we didn't find very many of them in the garden stores that we were shopping at the time. Now, I know there was another question I was supposed to answer a second ago. So supplies. I don't remember what it was.
And if anybody has finished their terrarium and hasn't gotten a picture with it, this is the call for that.
When you water,
Water, we were talking about
when
water.
you water, do you just drip throughout it?
If it feels, I love that container that you have. If you think it's quite dry, you can just pour water in, like a tablespoon at a time. If you are just rehydrating it, trying to get the moss to get settled in, the moss itself benefits from being wet, obviously. So that a spray bottle is enough for that. If you're not also trying to water the substrate to get more
I'm not
water
in
to
it.
the roots.
I still have time.
Lichen sometimes will dry out. If you put lichen in it for an ornamental purpose, just to have it look cool, or there's a stick with lichen on it that you put in there for decoration, that might not work forever, but it's very easy to take it out. Basically, plan to do that with lichen. What other questions are there?
Yes.
Yeah. Free terrarium consulting at the library.
Thank you so much, Lynn.
Yeah.
We so appreciate the workshop. I learned so much. You made it look so easy. So
Yeah.
anyway, those of you that want to make another terrarium, please feel free to do that. And then,
Oh, I know what I was gonna say. And I'm sorry to interrupt. I have these little things. This is what I was trying to remember. This is how to care for your terrarium. So I'll put these somewhere over there. Grab one when you walk out. Do you mind if I talk about this for a second before you close out? Okay. So it says, leave the lid on, wipe out condensation, water is necessary. We've talked a lot about that. Trim back the plants. This isn't gonna happen right away, but I have to trim these back all the time. So if it's healthy, it's gonna grow and you have to cut them back. And the more compact the plants are, the better they usually look. And then the indirect lighting. So keep it out of the sun. So this is if you want one of these, I'll put them over by the door. And then in addition to this, you guys